People who spend a lot of time working in isolation research stations, etc., what are your creepiest experiences? Worked overnights as a master control operator in my youth. One night, around 3 a.m., I catch sight of the camera we have aimed at the back door, and there's someone standing there wearing a scream mask, staring at the camera and not moving. I go to the back door, magnetic sealed, and a deadbolt for overnight. Door is next to impossible to force open. And look out the peephole, and there's no one there. Head back to control and see them walk back into frame, wave at the camera, and then walk away. Called the cops, they found nothing, and the camera doesn't record, live feed only. Story 2. I work in a building that is high security because we have a lot of expensive equipment. If you want to get to my office, you have to walk through 4 doors that require keycard access. It's very quiet and sterile. White walls. Nobody around. Very little furniture. Gray floors. Open ceiling so you can see the ducts. Sounds echo. I was working alone and noticed that there was a guy in the building. He was wearing the same shirt that maintenance wears, but it was weird because it was really late at night on a Saturday. He was also wearing jeans. And the maintenance people always wear black pants. He kind of gave me the creeps, so I closed my office door and stayed there. I could hear the echo of him walking back and forth for a while. He tried the handle on my office door twice. I heard the beep of him try to open my office door with a key card twice. It turns out that he didn't work there. He is the grown son of one of the workers and was walking around the building trying to steal stuff. But his dad's key card won't open any offices because it's a handyman card with limited access. Handymen have to make appointments and you have to let them in, unlike cleaning people or the techs maintaining the servers who can open any door. He got caught on camera and security checked to see whose card had tried to open the doors. The guy a fine for trespassing and his dad got fired. Story 3. I have a workspace as an old former madhouse built by monks, which had been turned into a hospital for SS personnel in World War II. Lots of spooky history. A huge building with long hallways and a stern 1920 architecture. Brick archways. Ugly sculptures of dead monks. I usually work late, until 3 in the morning, and I am usually the last person to leave the building. One night in winter, I locked my room and went to the exit. All the lights were off. The wind was howling. Suddenly, I heard the sound of running footsteps in the distance. Lots of running footsteps. And then it was quiet again. I went down some stairs, and there I saw little red lights blinking on the other side of a long, dark hallway, just for a moment. Then they were gone. I was pretty freaked out at this point. I walked faster in the direction of the exit. Then I heard those running footsteps again. I turned a corner and suddenly a bunch of kids were screaming in my face. Almost had a heart attack. Turned out the kids were playing laser tag. They borrowed the keys to the building from one of their parents. They had these laser guns with red lights to shoot each other with and were chasing each other through the dark building. They thought the building was deserted and almost crapped themselves when this big guy in a trench coat suddenly appeared in front of them. Story 4. I was working in a SIF, a secure, electromagnetically shielded and soundproof room for doing high security work. Such facilities have extremely strict and onerous rules for entry and exit. So basically you only go in if you have to, and there are 2-person rules that make it desirable for you to stay in if there are few people inside. One day, after being cooped up inside for hours, we exited the SIF. The halls of the building were completely empty. Other labs were completely empty. The break room was completely empty. It was zombie movie Twilight Zone creepy. Freaking out, we went to another part of the building which had windows. Outside, we saw a blizzard with over a foot of snow on the ground and a massive amount still coming down, and my roommate having his car pushed through the snow to exit the Orking lot. The same roommate I had carpooled to work with. This was before cell phones. So I bolted down the steps and out to the parking lot, in dress shoes, and barely caught him before he drove away. Story 5. I work at the Discovery Channel telescope in the middle of the Coconino National Forest. A typical night is usually myself, the telescope operator, and an astronomer. One night during hunting season, we had a curious elk that was wandering around the security fence perimeter. We could hear it bugle over the audio feed from the observation deck and hear it crunching around when we went outside. This lasted for about 30 minutes before it finally wandered off. About an hour later, we heard several gunshots nearby. Bad because there is no hunting for 2 miles around the facility. Sign are posted everywhere. Given that the astronomer that night was taking long exposure, 2 hours each image, I decided to go walk around the inside perimeter of the security fence. I had my red LED headlamp on and kept seeing the glistening eyes of elk all around the facility. Seemed to me like they were wanting to come in to hide from the hunter. Creepy, but not the worst part. Did the same thing about an hour later, walked the inner perimeter, and looked for the eyes. They were all gone. Right as I'm about to head back in, I hear someone clear their throat, standing at the entrance to the facility. Other side of fence. This dude simply asked, "You seen dem elk round here? I've been watching them come up the hill. Really need some elk." I informed him that I haven't seen them, but he called me a liar and said I was protecting them. He sat there at the gate till twilight, then wandered off into the woods. Told the Forest Service about it the next day. And they said they've had reports of a man going onto people's property and stalking prey, even going as far as hanging out on their porches. We now have IR cameras outside the observatory and heavy-duty security features on the entrances because of the weirdo. Story 6. I was working in Antarctica at a station with an elephant seal molting ground. I thought I had left something in a shipping container by the docks, next to the elephant seals. Mindful of my safety, and being a bit lazy, I grabbed a ute and drove down there at midnight. I parked and left the vehicle running with the lights on. As soon as I got out, I realized it was seriously dark. No moon, no building lights, can't see your hand in front of your face, dark. I hear heavy breathing coming from all around me, and I can hear the two-tone git starting to move. Whatever I forgot waited until the next day. Story 7. I spent some time in a monitorized room with nothing but a mattress and a toilet in there, officially in a psych ward for troubled teens, but that was more like prison. After 2 days already of just laying there on the mattress, you just feel how you lose your mind. You feel that paranoia because everything you do is on camera, pointing straight down at you while sleeping, while taking a crap. That was when you realize that you can actually lose your mind, is when you will appreciate sanity. Story 8. I work as a one-to-one in a hospital. Pretty much just watch to make sure the PT doesn't rip out their tubes. And I was working nights, so it's basically a patient and myself in a dark room. One night, I was with a patient in a double room, but the other bed was empty, though I couldn't see the other bed because a curtain divided to the beds for privacy. Middle of the night, the nurse came in and asked if I needed anything because my call bell light was on. I then told her that I never pressed the button, and it turned out it was the bell from the empty bed. The nurse just said, "Oh, that's creepy," and just left. I was freaked out the rest of the night. Story 9. I used to work as a night janitor at a student union. Skirting tables for events was part of the gig. I was scanning my floor for what needed to be done that night and went into a room annex. Long, thin room with one wall entirely made of glass facing the river. I approach a skirted table that's against the glad wall and hear snoring. Sounds funny though. I think it's on my radio. Assume someone fell asleep at work and rolled on the talk button. Standing there for a few seconds trying to figure it out, I realized there's a homeless man sleeping under the table. His snoring was climbing the glass window and bouncing off the ceiling. That's why I couldn't figure out when the sound was coming from. If you've ever thought you were completely alone only to find out you're within arm's distance from a person, your body becomes one big goosebump. It was freaky. Story 10. Worked overnights at 2 different 24-hour residential treatment centers for teens, aka poltergeist soup. We, staff and clients, would see and hear things, people during the middle of the night, almost every night. I remember when I worked at a substances and alcohol rehab facility, it used to be a nunnery attached to a church. I used to hear women singing through our speaker that communicated with our doorbell for visiting hours. I could see through the window of the door from where I would be sitting, and there was never anything there. I have a bunch more. Those places were full of weird crap. Story 11. I used to do really late red overnight experiments when I was doing my PhD. I worked in a laser lab, so it was a very large room that was sectioned off by massive thick laser curtains around each setup, so people don't get blinded if there is a stray laser beam. Anyway, it's late one night, probably around 2 in the morning. My experiment is dragging on, and I probably have another hour or so before it ends, and I can begin shutting down. Now, because this was also a spectroscopy lab, the lab was pitch black. And I mean the I can't see the hand in front of my face pitch black. Fortunately, I have a single computer monitor that doesn't output light that the spectrometer can see, at least with my laser wavelength. Now, the way the computer monitor is facing and the way the curtains are situated is such that people can immediately see me if they enter the curtains, but I can't see them even if I know they are there. The curtains are black and are made to absorb light. People have snuck up on me for fun, even stood there for minutes before they said something, or else I'd never noticed them. It's worth mentioning that the lab is also climate controlled and the AC never stops blowing, especially when we're running an experiment. We work with hot things. The climate control never shuts off, and the vents are diffused in such a way that there are no real streams of air moving around. This is to prevent dust buildup on the lasers and optics. So I'm chilling, sitting in the chair watching some YouTube or playing some Game Boy as the experiment runs. I have to check it and change physical settings every 10 minutes, or else I'd automate it. Note I have headphones on, so the lab is silent other than the chiller used to cool the laser and the hot setup. Now, tonight for some reason felt off. I didn't quite know what it was, but it was just weird. I was really paranoid, although I had no reason to be. I had done these experiments hundreds of times before. The entire building should be pretty empty at this point. The janitors had long since left, and it was rare for other people to stay that late. Anyway, I finished the level I was playing and decided to switch from my Game Boy to the computer. so I had to unplug my headphones from the Game Boy and plug them into the computer. But for some reason, when the headphones went silent, I heard what I thought was the door to the lab shut. It was pretty loud. Now, there are a few people who have the key to my lab, namely my boss, my lab mates, and the janitors. But I knew for sure that all of my lab mates and boss were surely gone, and the janitors are usually gone around midnight. However, it is possible to sneak into the lab from either of the adjoining labs if they were left unlocked, because we aren't allowed to lock doors between them, fire reasons. Need 2 exits to every room. Because of this sound, I ripped my headphones off, around the ear type, with pretty good sound isolation, to try to listen better, and I started looking toward the entrance in the curtains to my area. I didn't notice the curtains open, but looking up did make me realize that the curtains were damn swaying. That's usually indicative that someone just walked past them. However, I didn't hear any footsteps. I'm thoroughly freaked out at this point, so I spend the next 10 minutes just staring at the break in the curtains, looking and listening for any movement, to no avail. Now, you may not think that was freaky, but think of it this way. Who the heck was in my lab at 1 in the morning? Why didn't they say hi to me, as any of my coworkers or the janitors would have done? How long were they in the lab before I heard them leave? Were they watching me? After calming down, I walked out of my lab to go get a drink. Now, the lights in our building are on a sensor, and if nobody walks through the halls for more than 45 minutes or so, they shut off. The scary part was that the lights in the hallway were off, meaning nobody had walked through for a while. So what in the living did I hear in my lab, and what made the curtains move? I quickly finished up my experiment and practically ran out to my car. The next day, I asked the janitor if they were around last night, and he said that they had finished with my building at 11 or so. Story 12. My current job is not exactly physically isolating, but more of socially isolating. I'm working as a caretaker for a home full of disabled adults. I'm the night shift, and my job is to do some cleaning and make sure things go smoothly while the clients are sleeping. My job is about 8 hours of nothing all night, followed by a few hours of cleaning in the morning and helping clients get ready for their day program, work. In the last few months, we've had some strange stuff happen. One night I heard what sounded like a person crying in one of the clients' rooms, only to find out they were asleep. They don't have a TV in their room either, so I'm not sure what the noise could have come from. The next shift, while talking to one of the day staff before they left for the night, they told me about how the day before, after his clients had gone to bed, and just before I had arrived, he had heard someone walk from the garage, through the house, and into the room he was in. He turned around from what he was doing to talk to who he had assumed was a manager showing up to grab something, but no one was there. He said he searched the house, but never found anyone. Cool. 2. We have a nonverbal client who has a lot of dolls and toys in her room. The other day, when I came into her room to wake her up, she had a new doll lying in bed with her. She kept rolling on it or pressing on it while getting out of bed, and it would make that awful baby doll laughter noise. I knew right away I was not a fan of this doll. Later, at the very end of my shift, the day staff arrived and drove all the clients to their day program. I was alone in the house again and went to clean up any mess left in the clients' rooms. I start cleaning the nonverbal client's room and see the baby doll sitting on a chair in the other corner. I start to clean. From across the room, it begins laughing. I say out loud, "Nope, stop that." It stops and starts laughing a few seconds later. I say, in as firm a voice as I can manage, "I'm not going to put up with this crap," and walk over, open it up, and switch off the battery pack. 3. Just this week, I'm in the kitchen at the start of my shift and keep seeing, from my peripherals, what appears to be a small dog in the hallway, but I see it maybe 4 times. Usually, I figure things like that are my imagination, and this is no exception, but 4 times is a lot, so I go and check it out. No dog. About an hour later, I'm in the garage and talking on the phone with someone. It's about midnight, and they haven't gone to sleep yet. There's a pause while talking, when they say, "What was that?" I, as calmly as I can, say, "Hey, what?" They respond, "It sounded like a dog panting into the phone." Now I'm spooked, but trying not to seem like a total weirdo, I just say, "Huh, no, I didn't hear that." We get off the phone very soon after, and I go sit in the house with the lights on. Story 13. I've never told this story to anyone. In all my years as a locksmith, I've been in plenty of uncomfortable situations. Domestic disputes, business breakups. I still hate Fridays even though I've been retired from locksmithing for 5 years because of all the jobs I had to do, locking fired employees out. I've been in plenty of places someone would tell me was haunted. I would just think they were nuts and go about doing my job as fast as I could to get away from them. Only one time in 20 years did I ever feel like I was in a haunted place. I spent the first 15 years on the job in Metro Atlanta. I moved to a more rural area in the state for the last 5. This house was probably built in the 1930s, all brick, directly next to a main road. Still a 2-lane road, mind you, just pretty heavily traveled. Lots of traffic. It looked like a plain place. Nothing uncanny about it from the exterior, although the overgrown shrubs and trees gave it weird, shadowy places that I took no notice of at first. Inside the house was completely different. It seemed to be refashioned at multiple times, but nothing ever tied together. It had an odd, angular feel to it. Walking into that place, you could feel the air change. With every door open, it felt like air didn't move at all. Usually in my work, slamming doors were a constant. I'm standing at one door, someone else opens a door in the house, and interior doors slam because of the pressure change. Unblocked interior doors did not do that in this place. I walked into the kitchen and nearly scared a carpenter. "Damn, I can't wait to get out of this house," he says. "You'll see what I mean." He gathered his crap and left before I got back to my van with all the lock cylinders. From the moment I walked back into that house, I felt like I was being watched. It was silent, and several times I felt like something was reaching for me. That electric tingle you get watching someone slowly move their hand to your body. I went into overdrive and hauled ass as fast as I could. Job done. The funny thing was, I had probably passed that place 1,000 times. Like I said, it was a heavily traveled main road. It was in an isolated stretch, and not only had I never noticed it, I realized passing it a few weeks later that even though it was obviously there and easy to see, I still managed to overlook it when I was watching for it. It's like the place didn't want to be seen. A couple of months later, I get back to the shop and noticed a coworker had been there that day. This guy was a former Marine gym rat and as tough as they come. He comes in later and we are bull-craping around, and then I ask him what he thought of that house. He made a face like I asked him about his worst memory and said that was the creepiest house he'd ever been in. I just let it go, but I also never went back there. Story 14. I've been working in my trade for about 20 years. It can be difficult to focus when all the young bucks are asking you questions and blaring terrible music, so I tend to start work when everyone else leaves for the night. I started hearing sounds upstairs like people talking, walking, opening doors. I dismissed it as my imagination for a few days, but it got to be too much to ignore, so I started investigating when I would hear things. Never found anything. Thought I was going crazy. Turns out, one of the guys that lived near the shop made a hidey hole nest up in the attic to hide from his girlfriend like some kind of dumbass Phantom of the Opera. Story 15? Not so much working in isolation, but when I lived in residence at school, I would wait until 2 or 3 a.m. to shower because it was the only time there weren't other people in the bathroom. The residence building I was living in used to be a psychiatric residence for children, so I was always kind of spooked walking around at night. One night, I was showering at 3 a.m. and very clearly saw the shadow of a person reaching towards the middle of the shower curtain. I immediately slid it open, but there was no one there. Story 16. I used to work as security in a super old theater that hosted a few theater plays a year. So the shifts were usually 12 hours or more. You open and you close and you just make sure all the people rehearsing for the theater play gets in and out, etc. First one in, last one out kind of situation. It was chill because I would be sitting behind a glass wall playing World of Warcraft for 12 hours getting paid. I never got the creeps there, but it was haunted. Everyone believed so, but I was the only one apparently who believed it was a friendly ghost. The theater has offices in the 3rd floor, for example, where the old janitor 100 years ago would have his apartment before refurbished to offices. Well, every single key card to get into the main office door would get demagnetized. Doors wouldn't open in general, even with a standard key, and people in general felt pretty unwanted up there. No wonders when someone probably still lives there. This also happened on the doors into the foyer in the actual theater. Doors refused to open. Key cards would stop working. People suddenly couldn't get out one minute and thought I had locked them in, while next minute the door shows no problem whatsoever and is easy to open. So at the end of a long shift, where you most likely didn't see a single other person, walking downstairs to make sure all the lights are off, there are no more people inside and the doors are shut. And while walking back to exit, you see that the whole theater scene is lit up with studio lights and there are literally no one left in the building. Might not be creepy, but it makes you question your own sanity. Story 17. I don't work in extreme seclusion, but I can go days without seeing anyone. I do real estate photography, so I'm going in and out of strange houses all day, almost always vacant. I've had a ton of weird experiences and encounters with squatters, but the creepiest was a badly fire-damaged house I shot. The owner was a flipper and asked me to go get before photos. Before he hung up, he mentioned the previous owner take her life away in the house during the fire. I get there and the house is severely burnt and has no electricity, so the only light is my flashlight. I walk into the bathroom and immediately know where and how this woman ended her life. Story 18. I guess this qualifies as creepy. When I was 19, I had been hired to do the security at a venue people would rent to celebrate birthdays, wedding, etc. I would go there at 6 p.m. and leave at 6 a.m. the next morning. My job was to be there if they needed me, report any incident, and make people sign some paperwork in the morning. That type of stuff. That one day, I was posted at the most remote venue. On one side, there was a lake and there was a forest on the other. To go back to the civilization, you had to cross about 2 kilometers of forest. The people renting the place that night started leaving at 3 a.m., which is a bit early. I go talk to the guy who rented the place. He is fairly intoxicated, rude, and doesn't want to clean the venue before leaving. He just demands guidance on how to get back to the road. I tell him to drive about 400 meters. Then there is a parking lot. Then you just keep driving and you will eventually find the road. He leaves and come back 5 minutes later because they did not manage to find the exit of the parking lot. I give him more details. He leaves and comes back quite angry after not finding the exit again. This time he asks me to get in the car so I can show them. I get in and show them the way. Once in front of the exit, he opens the door and kicks me out in the dark in the middle of the forest. I have no flashlight, so I go back to the venue, a bit scared listening to the sounds around me. I got the venue, picked up my stuff, and give a call to my father so he picks me up. We agree to meet at the next city train stating in 45 minutes. I go back in the forest. By the way, that was 13 years ago, so no flashlight on my phone, and my screen was so tiny back there that this was not an option either. Halfway through, I arrived to the ruins of an old house. This house has probably been destroyed decades ago, maybe during World War II, and there is only one wall still standing. As I pass the wall at 3:30 a.m., in the middle of the forest, I see a guy standing there facing the wall. He is not moving or talking. He is just standing there. The only thing that came to my mind was, nope. So I started walking as fast as I can without looking like I was running away, making sure I was not too loud so I could hear if the guy was coming after me. After a few seconds trying to play it casual, I decided to run away. At that stage, I was pretty scared already. I end up on a path and I can see the end of the forest. There is a gate at the end of the path, maybe 200 meters away. All of a sudden, 2 sets of headlights light up just in front of the gate. No one drives there, and I'm like, what's going on tonight? I hide on the side of the path, wondering what they are doing here. Think they might be in a remote location to deal substances or something. There's no other way for me, so I start walking on the side of the path, not making any noises. Turns out those were regular dudes who came there early to fish. Story 19. I was working 2 jobs on Black Friday, and after my first job at the mall was over, from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., I headed to my other job. It was at a local bead shop in an old house. It was still dark when I got there, and we didn't open until 10, so I went inside to go sleep on the futon upstairs for a couple hours. When I opened the back door, I could see the silhouette of a person standing in the back room. They were about 20 feet away from me, but the streetlight was shining in through the window behind them, and I could see it perfectly. I froze for a couple seconds thinking someone had broken in, then flipped on the light by the door. The silhouette vanished as soon as the light came on, and I said, "Oh, damn that," and went to sleep in my car instead. Story 20. I used to work for a tech company that manufactured PCBs, like the circuit boards that go inside computers. Anyway, they opened up a brand new, enormous building just across town, and they transferred my department over there. Except my department consisted of me and 3 other guys, one of which was my manager. Everybody else had quit or found new jobs. My manager had to stay at the corporate office most of the day, and my other 2 coworkers were considered critical personnel. And were also told to continue to report to the same location to work on other projects. So I moved, along with a bunch of racks of hard drives and testing equipment, to an almost completely vacant building. There were exactly 8 people working in the entire building. I don't know the exact square footage, but it took a good 5 minutes of straight walking to get from the main entrance to the back of the building. To complicate matters, all the doors were key-carded and access restricted to your job function. And since I was the only employee in hard drive testing, I was all by myself in a room for 8 hours per day. My manager would sometimes show up just to make sure I was doing my job, but it already involved a lot of waiting around. So he would really just check to make sure the machines were all running. By the time I was ready to leave for a new job, we had run dry of hard drives anyway, so I was quite literally surfing the web by myself a lot of the day. Some creepy things that would happen. I could frequently hear voices coming from the storage cages. I was the only one with a key to that padlock. The lights would turn themselves off, which was normal because they were all motion activated. But since I was by myself, I had to sometimes flail my arms to get them to turn back on when I was sitting still for long periods of time. It was always a bit startling because the testing room was brand new, but almost totally empty. So when it went dark, it went really dark. Like, I just went temporarily blind. Dark. I would sometimes see shapes of people in the corner of my eye when I was sitting by myself at breaks or during lunch flipping through my phone. When I turned around to greet whoever it was, they were already gone. Lastly, and the worst one that I can remember, is always hearing people knocking on the door to the hallway before my section, or trying to use their key cards on the little card reader. I would go to the door to let whoever it was in. I didn't give a crap about security protocols or anything since the rooms were all empty. But there was never anybody there, and everyone I asked said they never knock or try to get in themselves. They always call my cell phone if they need to pass by to another area. It was a cushy job, or it became one after I got moved since I had hardly any work and no oversight, but I was glad to be out of there a few months after I got transferred. Place gave me the creeps, especially when it got darker earlier towards the end of the year. Story 21. Back in the early 90s, I was working as a security guard for a large church property. This included dozens of portables, tents, and acres of land, surrounded by miles of open desert scrub brush. Not isolated in today's world, but this was back when there was no cell phones and no TV reception, no internet access. So I worked night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Also, the lights on the property at night were the yellow night lights, so everything had that sickening darkness feel. Okay, so everything creaks due to the temperature changes. So in complete silence, the metal walkways between the portables would crack and pop at night. Well, one night, the metal fatigue starts at the back portables. I'm sitting alone watching a movie on a small TV combo, and I can distinctly hear the creaking start 6 portables away. And it's 3 a.m., and it's just slowly cracking closer to me. I'm now looking in that direction, as it exactly the sound you would hear if several people were all coming towards me at the same time. I lower the TV volume, and now it sounds as though there are several smaller people coming towards me. The metal is just slowly creaking closer and closer. My rational mind states the obvious, that the metal deck has shifted, and now each plate has to compensate, and therefore this is science in action. But there is a catch. I can feel something is off, like a presence of people. And yeah, let's just get to it. Children. Yep. I can sense that there are children walking towards me. So I turn off the movie and turn my chair towards the oncoming sound of the metal floor creaking towards me, foot by foot by foot. I back my chair against the fence. But now I have seen the shinning, so I don't want to meet those damn girls, so I tell myself it's time to do a patrol. I briskly walk out to an open area and then make rounds, and mother damn sounds keep coming behind me. Now my mind is racing, and I'm fully freaking out. So I start doing ninja karate moves as I walk. So if you were looking at me from a camera, you would see me walking, and then randomly doing a karate stand and a high kick, back kick, my version of a roundhouse kick. This goes on for hours, and I now have this distinct experience of there being 5 little kids from the 1800 following me. 3 girls, 2 boys. I mean, I can feel it. This goes on all night, and then I go home. Next night, same crap, and the next and the next. Realizing I can get this out of my head and that ninja kicks and karate stands are exhausting, I finally just start talking to them aloud as I make rounds. At first, I was super aggressive and cursing, but then slowly, I just would be like, I'm going to the top tent, so it'll be back in a few. But the sense of the 5 kids never left. Oh, and here is the other part. After that week, I started each shift with a Disney cartoon and goldfish crackers. I never saw them, but their presence never left. I did this for almost 3 years before I left for my new job. Story 22. Isolation in dark room for 1 day and 1 night. Woke up at night with an illuminated, shadowy figure at the foot of my bed, and then it disappeared. I know it's a hallucination, though, because there was no light for it to happen. Story 23. Mine's probably my creepiest experience so far in that it was unexpected and definitely the poor guy I woke up's creepiest experience. I don't work in isolation, but I work overnights from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. in a secured building on a university campus in a secured basement area. In order to get into the building, you need a physical key, proximity key card. To get into my section of the basement, you need a key, swipe card. We turn off all the lights outside of our office room, as there's no need to have them all going when there are only 2 people in the whole building and we're located in one office. We might get the occasional drunk students trying to get into the building for the bathroom or students that stay in the building after closing time studying for exams, but this is only during the fall, spring semesters. Our building is classrooms and admin offices, admin it, HR, payroll, etc., so it's super dead over summer, winter breaks. It's a random July evening, morning about 4 a.m., and it's just one of my coworkers and myself in the building. I decide I need to use the bathroom. The bathroom is on the other side of the building, and to get there, I have to walk through 2 halls. I meander my way out of my office through the first unlit hall and through a secure door into the second hall. It's pitch black, and I can't see crap except the vending machine light at the far end near a break room and bathrooms. I'm strolling along browsing Reddit on my phone, about half down this hall when I hear distinct sounds coming from the break room. I had walked down this hall to the bathroom around 1 a.m., and there wasn't anyone there, so I'm terrified. My first reaction is, crap, man. I'm going to have to call campus police because there's obviously someone inside the break room, and this is going to be how I pass. I make my way back to my office and ask my coworker if he knew about the person in the break room. He has no idea, so I decide that I'll just go confront the person and see if they were supposed to be in the building. I tell my coworker if I'm not back in 2 minutes to call the police and then set off to confront the unknown. I'm brave and dumb, really. I make my way back through the halls and into the break room. Some dude is laying on a couch with his head on the opposite end of where I'm standing. He's not able to see me, and he looks like he might be trying to sleep. I croak out a, "Hey dude, are you supposed to be in here?" As I prepare to flee the room in case he's not, dude jumped a good 2 feet, dropped his phone and all. Turned out it was just some random campus facilities cleaning guy that came into our building thinking it was empty after getting off work at 3 a.m. to take a nap in our break room, rather than going home and coming back to campus to catch a bus at 6 a.m. Story 24. Not sure if this belongs here, but a couple years ago I did overnight security as a team leader at this festival venue in a large, empty city park. Big open field in the middle with a sound stage on either side, some very expensive equipment, and a thick patch of trees surrounding us on all sides. Nobody could easily get in because of a large security perimeter with, when disturbed, very noisy fencing. You could sometimes hear sounds of the city, drunk students, or someone walking their dog at 2 a.m. Apparently people do this. It was mostly quiet though, because the forest would block much of the noise. Gravel-covered paths meandering around us with a few wooden bridges across small puddles. Me and a couple of trainees doing rounds through the pitch-black park. We'd sit on the large soundstage looking out on the field and send 2 people out to do a round every half hour or so. Sometimes we'd shine our flashlights at the field when we thought we saw something on the field. On a few of these occasions, we would see big shiny eyes looking back at us. Cats. No biggie, but it would set the stage for the other things we noticed later that night. When colleagues did rounds, we could hear and track them through the entire park because of the gravel paths. It would be crystal clear where they were, and we could tell them in detail where they were at any given time through our portable radios. We knew we had a quick response because at one point we saw flashlights shine across the field from the entrance. Quickly raced towards it only to find out it was a curious police patrol doing their midnight round through the park. They seemed impressed with our response. Big pat on the back, good job. Anyway, at some point during the night, all of us were sitting on the soundstage, resting, having quiet conversations. Out of nowhere, we heard the unmistakable rattling of a fence, crunching of gravel, and thumping across a bridge within 50 meters of our stage. Everybody heard it. Everybody knew it was the exact same sound our colleagues made when doing rounds through the forest. This had to be a trespasser, no doubt about it. I told half my people to circle right, blocking any exits. Me and a trainee circled left and quietly bolted towards the origin. Nothing. I was horrified to see my colleagues approach from the opposite direction, having found nothing either. For the remainder of that night, we upped the rounds, but nobody saw a thing. Every time they'd come across the place where we heard the sounds originate from, they made that exact same crunching and thumping noise. We could clearly distinguish them while coming past that spot, which bugged us even more. We could never establish who or what it had been, and that was probably what stuck with me most. I'm 100% certain there was someone there. Our ears didn't lie. Bugs the heck out of me when thinking back. Also, I once saw strange lights in the sky, but everyone does at some point, right? Story 25. I used to work overnight as a dispatcher. System monitoring most days, we had 2 people per shift. Pretty much the only reason we wouldn't would be if someone was sick or something. Most nights were completely uneventful. Basically did nothing for 8 hours. One night around 1 a.m., I hear screaming my coworker, and I both start checking cameras. Nothing. I grab my radio and start running, though the building to find this girl. Ran down to the first floor before I realized it was coming for the back parking lot. I exit the building expecting to have to fight someone. What I actually find is a girl alone in her car just screaming and crying. I find out she just wanted to vent and was seriously okay. She thought no one would be in the office park at 1 a.m. I promptly told her to knock it off as it is, was absolutely terrifyingly, and to please leave. So not really that scary, creepy, strange at the end of it all, but it was absolutely the worst 2 minutes of my life as I was trying to find the screaming. Story 26. I work in a liquor store. I do closing shifts alone for several hours in the shop until 10:30 or so. I'll regularly be in the cooler and hear footsteps in there with me. That's pretty much nightly. Also, one time I was counting down my till well after closing and heard a bottle clank somewhere in the store. Walked over and found a bottle of wine standing upright on the floor in the middle of the aisle. I had just done my nightly walkthrough to make sure all shelves were in order. I had also just mopped the floor. The tiles were still wet without a single footprint leading up to or away from the bottle. I logged into the CCTV system and started looking back through the past 30 minutes for that particular aisle. Nothing. At one point, that particular camera just blipped out, and when it came back, the bottle was there. Story 27. I don't really work in isolation, but most nights by the time I leave work, it's pretty late and there are very few people left around. I usually leave by myself. One night I got into the elevator alone and pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator stopped at the ground floor, but the doors didn't open. Then it went to the top floor. It just started going back and forth between the top floor and the ground floor without ever stopping to open the doors. I clicked the alarm button in the elevator and got on the line with security. They were sympathetic, but the only solution they could offer was to just keep trying different floors until the elevator stopped. So that's what I did, but I had no luck until I tried the second floor. In my building, The second floor is famous for how creepy it is. The elevator area is the only area that looks finished. The rest appears to be under construction, yet completely abandoned at the same time. The elevator area has dark, red walls and very dim lighting. This is the only lighting on the entire floor. Even when the elevators aren't going completely haywire, they'll stop on the second floor and open the doors every now and then without any explanation. It's been that way for the last 3 years I've worked there, at the very least. So of course, it's only fitting that my runaway elevator would finally stop and let me out on this creepy-ass floor. Security told me to just wait there for them to come get me. During that crazy elevator ride, I kept thinking, this is the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. But I was wrong. Those long, agonizing minutes of standing there, alone, on the second floor, squinting into the dark corners of that place were the most terrifying moments of my life. The elevators still inexplicably stop on that floor from time to time. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but if I did, I'd say there's something on that floor that wants to get people. Story 28. Worked overnights in a gas station for a summer, and it was my responsibility to restock the fridges. We had a garage as part of the building, as well as a car wash. The stockroom was across the shop, and in the back of it was the side entrance door to the car wash. It was a quiet night, and I was carrying an ambitious amount of inventory by hand. As soon as I set foot in the shop, I got the chills and the hair on the back of my neck rose. I knew that logically I was safe and that there was nobody there, but it felt like someone was walking on my heels. Another time, I was in the cashier's booth with the steel door leading to the shop, closed. There was a tiny window on the door, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young boy walk out the garage door. The overhead door was obviously closed, and the path he was going definitely lead out there. Story 29. Worked as a lab student in Alert, Nunavut. Look it up. Most northerly inhabited place in the world. Was there for my second term. It was January. So total darkness. The lab I worked at was an atmospheric lab, so it was far from the main base, maybe 5 kilometers. Around the lab, there were lifelines leading to all of our instruments outside. However, on this particular Wednesday, which was flacking day, it was a little stormy, but nothing too serious. Since I was the student, I did all of the outside flacking. Basically, I loaded up a sleigh with evacuated flasks and would walk about 300 meters from the lab, open up the flasks, and then walk back to the lab. We then would send them south for analysis. Since we had to ensure that we got the best samples, we always had to walk into the wind. That means no lifeline. It was coming from a different direction every time. On this Wednesday, I had my little headlamp, walked out and pulled my sleigh into the darkness, the darkest dark. I was a couple hundred meters out and everything went dark. I turned around, the lab was gone, the station was gone, where we parked our truck was gone. I was alone, with only a headlamp and a sleigh of empty glass flasks. I panic. I have no radio, no phone, not that they work up there anyways, and no clue where anything is. The wind was strong enough that I couldn't even find my tracks. I accept my fate and just stay put, heart racing. This is it. This is how I pass. After the longest 2 minutes of my life, the power comes back on. Story 30. Due to me trying hard to start a business years ago, I basically isolated myself in a unique way, just working non-stop or hours that didn't let me see or talk to anyone. Even though I was still living at home with my mom, there were huge patches of time where I wouldn't see her, come home at 10 and leave at 4. Maybe a "how was your day" once a week through a closed door since I woke her up when I came home. But that was it. When I was really getting low on money, I stocked up on food by a delivery service and stayed in my shed, work area. So I didn't spend any fuel. They were really efficient. I didn't even know they came until I got a text. Same with the stock delivery. Everything was just put where I marked never seeing a soul. I did this for a couple of years and full isolation for about 3 months, max. All of my own deliveries were made in the wee hours of the morning, so I didn't see anyone then, even if they were home. To give a little bit more context, I got fuel once on daylight hours when there were people there. So I thought I would pay by hand, maybe splurge and get a Coke, since I just got cash via my letterbox for a job. The cashier asked, "How is your day going?" And I had to take a moment to pry my lips apart. Hadn't eaten or drank in like 10 hours. But once I did, I couldn't speak, or not. Very well, I'd forgotten. I got out a good, but it felt so unnatural. Even the words from her mouth didn't seem quite right. Anyway, since then, I started to talk while I worked in an attempt to not be caught off guard like that. I like to think it's normal, but probably isn't. The weird thing that relates to your post is, I think I developed a subconscious that can use my own voice. A couple of times during this isolation, I heard an unbelievably loud "stop" or "Aiden," my first name, when I was doing something dangerous. After each of these outbursts, I felt ill like a really sore throat, but also like I lost all of my energy for the day. I think a part of me knew to stop and told me that. It might be linked to an injury I had in the early part of me starting out that caused me to be bedridden for 2 months straight. Story 31. I was working in the villages of Malawi, Africa. and came to one community very isolated and remote. The children stopped going to school because these guys were terrorizing them. They were witch doctors, and if caught, they'd take the kids into the cemetery and do crazy things. They also terrorized the widows and others in the community. When they told me the story, I thought they might be exaggerating a bit. I didn't ever feel scared when I was in the villages. And since they are cut off from technology, I thought maybe it was just a bit of folklore passed away to create fear. Then one day, I was sitting on a banana fibers mat with a widow and drinking tea. I couldn't speak the tribal language. So we just smiled and drank together in silence and peace. All of a sudden, I heard like this grunting sound. An electric bolt of fear crept down my body. I can't even explain how intense this fear was. It's like I just froze and couldn't even turn around. I just felt evil and darkness around me. Anyway, these witch doctors surrounded us for a while and just grunted and hissed and made these animal noises. We didn't move an inch. We never turned around. They were so close and literally right behind us, and all I could think the entire time was I'd feel a spear in my neck any second. After a while, they left, and eventually my transportation arrived. A few other Americans were in other villages and came for my pickup. I remember once I got in the car, I couldn't even speak for a while what had happened. My words and stories don't do justice to what I felt that day. I never knew darkness like that existed, but it does. Story 32. This happened a few years ago when I was working at a car dealership. Our business had just moved into a new lot down the road, and the cars were parked in an open-air parking garage. One way in and one way out with one set of stairs, which was right by the entrance. So I'm hanging out at the entrance, and I hear a car door slam. I found it strange since no cars had driven in and no one had gone up the stairs. So I start walking up the stairs, and I hear another door slam shut. I'm thinking, what the heck is happening? Next day, I tell my coworkers what happened, and they all think I'm just delusional. Fast forward, a week later, I had to travel down the road to another dealership to pick up some parts. Dealership I went to had just moved out from where my company had moved in. I walked down to the parts department and grabbed my part. As I'm walking away, the guy behind the counter asks if I've worked the night shift yet at our new place. I told him I had, and he quickly responded with, "Be safe. That place is haunted." I immediately got goosebumps and proceeded to tell him what I'd experienced just a week prior. He said it was normal and you get used to it. Freaked me the duck out. Story 33. I was photographing a waterfall in a deep basin. I was the only one in the basin. I was alone from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. The trail that comes in was right up against a rock face that was straight up and over 400 feet high. When I was heading back up, there was bare, wet human footprints up the stones of the trail. I got to a spot where I seen muddy footprints leading into the brush. A few moments later, I heard a scream from the same bushes. The sound to me sounded like a mountain lion. They are common in the area. I ran faster than I've ever ran before. I called rangers to my mile marker, and I've checked back since then. No missing persons reports have been filed, nor was anyone's car in that area that night. Easily one of the scariest experiences I've had. Story 34. I'm a researcher in a very large building that mostly houses HVAC systems and other equipment that keeps the building pressurized and sterile. Our lab floor is 3 stories underground, and everything is very medical. The long hallways form a giant square around our dirty and clean cage wash areas, and the lighting is not motion activated. Instead, it is controlled on a timer. There are 3 people I know who work animal care in the building, and 1 other person in a different lab from my own. I'm the lead in my lab, and my boss rarely comes down to help, so often I find myself coming in late or on weekends to wrap some stuff up. One particular Sunday, I had to run a test that took 5 hours to complete, and all the lights were off, except for basic emergency lights, in the completely deserted high-tech facility. I felt creeped out when I walked down to my floor and through the door that goes into the corridor to my lab suite, which was bathed in complete darkness. The pointed light at the far end of the corridor was the only thing allowing me to see through the dark. I got into my suite and the light switch was turned off, normal, so I turned it on and proceeded to get my testing started. Our door to the suite is kind of funky. You have to scan your card and then jiggle the handle a few times before the lock disengages. As I was wrapping up testing, I had to take a cartload of dirty cages to the cage wash through the creepy corridor. I'm serious. My facility looks just like a haunted psych ward on the weekends. I was really tired, missed a medication that morning, and was overall just exhausted. I started hearing a man mumbling at me in a low, intimidating voice, and then deep, manic laughter. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, but in my body I just started panicking. I threw the cart where it belonged super fast and immediately booked it back to my lab suite. I swiped my card and tried the handle. Nothing happened. By this point, I'm literally having a panic attack, looking frantically left and right like someone is going to appear and hit me. I got the door open and rushed inside, pushed against the hydraulics to close the door, leaned my back against it, and slid slowly down to the ground, realizing what a damn idiot I was. Story 35. I'm a janitor who cleans after hours at a few large locations. It would really freak me out when I would come in and the alarms wouldn't turn on. I get paranoid that some addict is around the corner. Not really much of a story, but it is inspiring me to make a video game out of it. Story 36. Engine room of a carrier in port. Around mid-watch is when the plant gremlins start to come out. Cold Iron Watch was the only time I've ever had a full-blown panic attack. Story 37. Not sure if this counts, but here you go. I used to work the 1-hour photo lab for a big box retailer. After a store remodel, the lab, which didn't move but other things moved around it, is now located in the least shopped part of the store. I used to have a direct sightline to the rest of the store through parallel aisles. Now I'm staring at toilet paper. I actually refused to buy Charmin, not because of the weird-ass bears commercials, but because those damn ass bears on the packages just wouldn't stop smiling at me. Anyways, foot traffic to the photo lab fell off a cliff. I had regulars who were legitimately surprised that the lab was still there. People complained all the time that the lab's new location, remember didn't move, was inconvenient. It got so bad that there would be entire shifts where, if I didn't abandon my post and take a walk around the store, I wouldn't have human contact. This is in a publicly accessible building doing upper tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in sales, depending on time of year. My psyche started taking a hit hard. I'm still not sure if it was more a call of the void type thing or actual depression, but for a moment, I actually considered drinking the photo development chemicals because the isolation was just getting to be a bit extreme. And don't get me wrong, I had plenty of work to do with online orders and keeping the lab well organized, cleaned, and maintained. But I got so proficient at it that I'd have everything done aside from orders done inside the first hour. If I tried going slower to stretch it out, I just felt like I was being inefficient. Management saw me taking frequent walks and would give me busy work to help out with the rest of the store. That could be done at photo because they thought the machines would detonate if I wasn't there to stop it. However, being by myself with nothing but the white noise of the lab machines, it was easy to crawl into my own headspace and start getting depressed again. I've since transferred to a different position in the store, but I will never forget the isolation of working in that lab. Seriously scared the crap out of myself with how dark my thoughts could get. Story 38. Used to be a night janitor in a movie theater. We would go in at 4 and clean until the doors opened at 11. To save time and our jobs, we would sometimes come in around the time the last movies were finishing and just sleep in one of the empty theaters, making sure we would be there when the shift started. Our basic mo was to use electric leaf blowers up and down the aisles of each theater, blowing popcorn and trash all the way to the bottom, then cleaning the seats up manually for anything gross or larger debris. This was expedient, but it was very loud, so it was easy to lose yourself in the work. Of course, the lights were on in the theaters to better assist in the cleaning, and usually we were the only ones there at the time. So whenever something strange happened, we would chalk it up to the other guy. There was one standing rule, though, that we all followed to the letter. No one in the projection booth. There was no reason to go up there. We didn't clean it. All our supplies were downstairs. And most of all, it was haunted. There is a phenomenon that happens with theaters and projection booths. No matter what, you always feel like you're being watched. When you're walking around deaf from the sound of the blowers in an empty movie theater, and you happen to glance up at the booth, and there is unmistakably someone standing there watching you, you will crap your pants, especially when you go out into the hallway and find the other guy in his theater working, especially when you and he go to either end of the building, to the 2 exits of the booth, and trap whoever it was up there, and there is no one there. We just chose not to duck with it. Story 39. I was once on a solo assignment to safely prepare computers in an abandoned medical lab to be destroyed, sold, so I had to gather all hard drives, storage devices, and secure them for shredding. The lab had been closed during business hours with patients there, blood tests running, etc. So there was still blood in centrifuges, needles that didn't make it in the sharps box, etc. I was alone in the building and had been told there was no power, but there was running water. I needed a drink, so I started walking through the dark hallways, trying to find a sink. As I neared the bathrooms, one of toilets flushed. I bolted back to the warehouse room I'd been working in, which had an exit. I was sure there was someone living or squatting inside of the building and called my sister, who happened to be our client contact for this project. She laughed pretty hard first, then said she did the same thing when she first went there. Apparently, one of the toilets runs constantly, and when it fills up too much, it flushes. A bit later, I got another scare when a door slammed, but that was because the power was on, and the ace kicked in, sucking the door closed. It didn't help that the place was 3.5 hours away, in the middle of a cornfield with nothing else around, and I'd been awake since 3 a.m. to make it up there in time. To get into the building, I also had to step over dead birds that I'd imagine had flown into the windows. Story 40. Hopefully, not too late to the party. In high school, I used to work at a sandwich shop that was within an old university. The layout of the store was different from most stores, and we had a huge back room with a small office and several large coolers, 2 of which were non-functional. My co-workers and I experienced so many strange things there. Doors slamming, strange noises, apparitions. You name it. I personally had a few experiences, the two scariest I can think of. One, since we were closed on Sundays, I was tasked with going to the store and prepping all of the food for the following day. So I'd go for a couple hours completely alone and prep things. On one particular occasion, the air felt different and I was immediately uncomfortable. I normally was able to be in and out with no issues, but this time was different. I tried to finish things as soon as I could, but as I was about to leave, I saw this black humanoid figure lunging at me from one of the furthest back rooms. I freaked out and flinched. Strangest thing is that I felt a surge of ice-cold air hitting me on the face as the creature would have hit me. I didn't finish prep and they just left. 2. I was one of the first people, along with my manager, to arrive that morning. I lost track of him while finishing prepping food. At one point, I walked by the small office the manager would often hang out in, which was only accessible with a key, since money was kept there. I could swear I saw him or something sitting on the desk. But immediately after seeing him in the office, he walked in from the front of the store. Confused, I walked to the office and it was empty. He couldn't have walked in and out of the office since I would have heard him as I was standing right there. He also had the only key. We eventually started calling the ghost Stan. I never did feel fully comfortable there, though. Story 41. In college, I worked for the Student Publicity Center, where we produced flyers and posters for the different student clubs and organizations on campus. It was a blast, usually. Part of the job was making huge posters to advertise events. We would print our designs on clear plastic sheets, then use an overhead projector to enlarge and trace the design onto sheets of paper since we didn't have a wide format printer. It wasn't anyone's favorite part of the job since it took a long time and a lot of permanent marker work, but the finished product was pretty cool. Our workroom was separate from our office. It was tucked in the back of the basement of the student union down a back hallway that few people knew about. I'd often come in on weekends when the SU was closed to work on my posters without interruption, since it was kind of tedious work. Plus, I could smoke on my way to campus, which helped make it fun. I was there one Sunday, alone in the building, plugging away with music on loudly when I felt something off, pulling me out of the focused zone I was in. I capped my marker and looked towards the door where another student, I presume, was leaning against the doorway, just watching me. He was about my age, skinny, pale, and just staring at me blankly. I lost my crap and jumped up from the crouch I was in since I was inking the bottom of a poster at the moment. I asked him what the duck he was doing, naturally. He said he heard the music and was just watching me work, in a flat way of speaking that I remember feeling weird about at the time. I have no idea how long he'd been watching or why he was in the building. He muttered an apology and left. I waited until I heard an exterior door close and then left through a different exit. I've never been so startled by another person in my life. Story 42. My dad worked at the haunted Toys R Us in Sunnyvale, so he worked as a night watchman back in the day to pay for school. Cool gig, got to sit around and study, while being paid for doing next to nothing. Learned to juggle and play guitar, too. Weird stuff happened there all the time. Objects would fall off shelves as you walked past them. Lights flickered on and off from time to time. Noises from the other side of the hall. Stuff like that. So there he was in a big, mostly dark store, all by himself, thinking about the ghost. He said out loud, "If there is a ghost here, then that balloon, the red one in the middle of the roof, will pop." Right as he finished the sentence, the balloon burst. Suffice to say, he turned on all the lights in the building and got as close to a door as he could for the rest of the shift. Story 43. Was working a weekend night shift, so I was the only person in the factory. Went out to the storeroom to get material at 2 a.m. and a person with their hood up was walking out the other door. The light in the hallway he walked into is automatic and never came on. Asked the security guy the next week to check the cameras. They weren't working. No one clocked in or out of the factory either. I don't know who or what I seen, but they scared the crap out of me. Story 44. My uncle works as security at a factory, so he heads home at around 5 a.m. Apparently one night, he heard loud crashing and banging from around the corner, so he snuck around and quickly peeked. There was nothing there, so he went back to work. About 20 minutes later, the loud banging continued, but this time from a desk right in front of him. He looked up just in time to see a lamp slide off and break. And the banging stopped completely. He doesn't know whether there was something there or if the lamp was on a bad angle and slipped off the table. Story 45. I used to work at a tourist attraction where a TV show was filmed. For part of the time I worked there, I was the housekeeper. I had to clean up after daily tours and prepare the house for parties or overnight guests. Even though I know of nothing bad happening there, everyone told me it was haunted. Turn out all the lights only to get to the end of the driveway and have all the lights on, etc. So as I'm cleaning on a regular basis, I hear footsteps in other rooms, especially upstairs. I was freaked out, but I had a job to do. I just started talking to them. Hey, look, we've got a dinner party for 40. 2 couples are spending the night. I have to get this done. Sometimes the living room lights would go on and off like they acknowledged what I said, and usually that would be the end of the noises. In a way, I felt like we were cool. I have no idea if they did anything to the people who slept there. Didn't really interact with people that would have that feedback. My boss lived on property, and he'd sneak up on me when I was vacuuming, laugh that he scared me, and then ask why I didn't carry a gun working alone at night. Because you'd be dead fool. You're the only one bugging me. He lived too far to walk, so always drove his truck. Before I'd think there were ghosts, I'd make sure his truck wasn't there. Besides, I think shooting at already dead people is probably pretty pointless. He got too much joy out of scaring me. He'd usually been drinking, so he would have told me if it had been him. He was never that slick anyway. I will say I was quite happy when I got promoted. Story 46. Worked alone evenings, cleaning in a building by myself. Had been there about 3 years by this time. Had on my headphones in the elevator, and the song I was listening to abruptly stopped partway through. Then Stairway to Heaven started to play. I didn't even have Stairway to Heaven on my MP3 player. It had never been on my MP3 player. Story 47. Broadcast engineer here. I have to babysit our transmitters when we broadcast live Broncos games. This was when Peyton Manning was on a tear a few years back. But I'm English and not a massive fan of the game in general. So oftentimes I'll read a book, usually horror or dark fantasy. Leaving the facility up on Lookout Mountain after a Broncos game is always a dark, poorly lit experience. This time, one of the outside lights had burned out, but the security cameras didn't show anything, so I trundled out as I always do. The dark patch is halfway between me and my car, and I wasn't really paying attention until I heard a snort and, looking up, saw two massive billowing streams of breath about 7 feet up. I thought it was Asmodeus, who I'd been reading out that evening. My heart skipped, and all the hairs on my everywhere stood up. Out of the darkness lumbers the biggest elk I've ever seen. He looked at me with mild disdain, huffed again, then turned and lumbered away, completely unimpressed by my 6 foot of Englishman, leaving me stood there equal parts shocked, terrified, and relieved. I mustered up enough stiff upper lip to say, "Good night, Asmodeus," though I wager I didn't sound a half as stoic as I was going for. Then got in my car and went home. Story 48. To start off, I love listening to true crime podcasts. This summer, I worked by myself in a greenhouse at my university that was on the top floor of this building. To even get into the building, you need card access. But to use the elevator, you need card access and a key. Over the summer, almost 0 people were ever on campus, and especially not up on this floor, or even in the building for that matter. After probably 6 hours of working alone on the top floor of this building and listening to creepy stories, I was pushing my cart to the elevator, a massive industrial freight elevator that no one else uses. And I scan my card and wait for the elevator to reach my floor. I can hear it coming, and it's taking a while. So I'm still listening to this podcast about some killer. Once it's finally at the 9th floor, I get ready to open the outer door and happen to peer into the little window and see something inside staring at me through the window. I screamed and jumped back probably 2 feet before I realized it was just another research student coming up to use the greenhouse. Being alone for 6 hours and only hearing scary stories of people getting hitting really messes with your nerves. Story 49. I was working once at a security guard for a private firm. I was guarding a small building, only 1 floor of fence, gate, and a small garden. It was only 5 rooms, a main lobby, an office, and a few other storage rooms as well as a basement. I was always on duty alone at this place due to its size. I was in the lobby one night as always on my laptop doing nothing, expecting nothing. I hear a knock at the lobby doors. I head to the door and find no one, like at all. The gate is shut and locked up tight. I check around and head back to the desk. Soon after I hear the door to the office behind me open. I of course grab my light and my gun and head to the door. It's open, but no one is inside. Feeling a little freaked out, I sit back down and rather than get on my laptop, I close it and put it away. I sat silent in the dark, the only light I see from the street, and listened. The rain pouring outside, hitting the glass, doors, and roof. I hear footsteps and find no one. I hear knocking and stay put. Finally, I hear breathing right behind me. I get up and do a quick 180, expecting to see someone. Nothing. I sat for hours, terrified, hearing all kinds of noises and sounds, even feeling someone touch me at one point. 6 a.m. hits and I was out. I quit that job. I talked to my boss about it. He told me I wasn't the first to have that happen and that it was probably Zach. I asked who Zach was. He told me he didn't know. That was just what the first guy to quit called it. Story 50. I work in a network operations center, NOC, for a medium-sized telecommunications company. When I first started, I worked the graveyard shift. It was an old building in a downtown area of the city that it was in. The rest of the office was mostly B2B type of people and server rooms and whatnot. Keep in mind that there is a door with a small entryway at the front of the building that is locked. Even people with key cards can't get in after 5 p.m. And then there is a key card door beyond that. And then our room was 3 doors down from that. Also locked with a massive 3-pronged deadbolt with no window, only a small peephole looking out on the other side of the door. only a doorbell for someone to ring if they needed in. I was working the night shift alone this night because the other guy called out with the flu. Well, about 2 a.m., 4 hours into my shift, I start hearing loud banging on the metal door like a damn elephant is trying to enter the room. I jump out of my skin because it was a pretty quiet night. The banging goes on for about 5 minutes as I'm sitting in my chair, frozen from fear. I looked out the peephole, and there was nothing and no one there. I talked to the morning guys that came in who have worked there for years longer than me and told them about it. And their response was, "Oh yeah, that's Jim. He's a ghost that's been around for decades. He only bothers people when they're alone in the building." They said it so nonchalantly, like it wasn't even a thing. I about crapped myself. Story 51. I was a night custodian at an elementary school for several years. The school itself was not very old, but it was creepy in that it was haphazardly built by the community on swampland. After everyone had left and I was alone in the building, I would hear all sorts of weird noises. After walking through and locking all the classroom doors, I would regularly hear a door slam from the opposite end of the school. My office was the boiler room, and in the middle of winter when the blower fan was running full blast, I swear you could faintly hear children laughing over the sound of the fan. When the wind picked up behind the school, it sounded like eerie flute music, like it changed pitch and had an actual melody to it. Only once did I have something weird physically happen. Admittedly, it may have just been my mind playing tricks. I had a pretty good routine that I rarely strayed from. When I would clean the big gymnasium, I would gather all my stuff, brooms, wastepan, etc., and lay it on top of my garbage can, then wheel it all through the door together. This is a mundane but important detail. I would take off the big push broom and leave it outside the door while I turned on the lights. That way I could start sweeping right from the door to the center of the gym. Only this one time as I reached outside the door to grab my broom, my hand just smacked against the bare wall. I looked out the door and saw the broom leaning against the wall on the opposite end of the hallway, the end of the hallway that I hadn't even gotten to yet. Story 52. I'm a bit late, but the school I used to go to was really old, 1500. Back then, the students had to wear these long robes, and one day a boy's robe got caught on fire from the fireplace, and he was sadly burnt to death. The old part of the school, specifically the attic where he passed, has had some really creepy stuff go on at night when teachers are working up there alone. One teacher, who's this strict Irish man, now refuses to even go to the old part of the school after a night working there. He said the lights started acting up and he heard weird noises coming from the floor below, despite the fact he was the only person in the school to his knowledge. He then heard a rattle on a nearby window. He went to look out the window and he swears blind he saw the face of a boy on the other side looking back at him. He packed up his stuff, rushed out the school, and hasn't been back to the old part since. Another teacher, who also said she heard footsteps from the floor below and said the lights started acting weird when working up there at night, has a photo of some ghostly human-shaped shadow standing in the doorway to the attic looking in at her on her phone. She called a fellow teacher who lived nearby to come and check it out because she was too scared. No one else was meant to be in the old part of the school, and the other teacher found nothing. Story 53. Okay, late to the party, but still want to share for my fellow night shifters. This isn't particularly extreme, but still gives me the chills. I used to work as a pharmacy tech overnight at a hospital. My job was to deliver meds to all parts of the hospitals to machines that nurses use, like vending machines, but for meds. I hated it. The parts where I was mostly alone were the surgery areas where there was no one really around and the lights are dimmed. I would always wear headphones to keep me sane because of how quiet it was, and every little noise made me jump. One night, I pushed my cart into an empty, dimmed, lighted room as usual. As I went to punch in my password to access the machine, in the reflection of the machine window, I saw a figure of a woman walking in the room. I spun around so fast, but saw no one there. I didn't hear footsteps. I paused my music and I held my breath to make sure I could hear fine. Nothing. I turned back around and tried to fill the machine as quickly as I did and gunned it out of there. I avoided looking into windows or mirrors that whole week. I guess I'm a big scaredy cat, but hospitals at night freak me out. The amount of people that pass there just remind me that it can truly be haunted. Story 54. I worked as a field biologist in the Plumas National Forest many, many years ago. I lived by myself in a camp I set up by a lake about 30 miles from the closest town and as far up a mountain as an old logging road would take me. The location was central to my work area, but absolutely about as remote and distant from civilization as you can get in that part of the world. The first week of isolation was pretty novel, but I started to experience some really creepy things in the second week. Like leaving the fire to go take a leak and coming back to find a rock on my chair. How does a rock get on my chair in the middle of the night? I think it was the next night I put down my guitar. There's not a lot to do when living in deep isolation in the woods. Went into my tent, and then heard something strum the guitar, only to immediately pop my head out of the tent and see nothing anywhere near the guitar. Then there was the scream, or a howl, or something I don't know, but it was blood-chilling and freaked me out. Most every day I worked, hiking all over those mountains, blazing trails wherever I needed to go. I carried a 9 mm in the small of my back. For that week, I kept it on me at all times and under my pillow when I slept. After that second week, I never had another creepy experience. I think it was all just my mind playing tricks on me, creating stimuli because I had been deprived of it, but I can still hear that scream. Story 55. Not isolation as such, but when I was 18 years old, I was in trainee in a local authority. I can't remember what I was doing exactly, but for 4 days, I was sorting and tidying old files in the office basement on my own. It was directly under the main flight of stairs, and every sound anyone made on the stairs would echo around the room. It was spooky, and my nerves were shot once I was finished. The thing is, the office was in a rather historic building. You see, when it was a house, it was occupied by one Buck Ruxton. You might have heard of him. Story 56. I don't work at a research station, but I used to be a volunteer fireman and would spend a lot of time alone at the station. Was a college kid, new to the whole thing, and was so excited to take calls. A group of us would hang out a lot, but there were a lot of nights I'd just hang out alone. So I'm doing homework on the computer in the lounge upstairs when I hear the main door open up. It was on the first floor below the lounge. I figured it was another member and ignored it until they never came to say hi after a while, and I never heard anyone leave. It was always customary if you stopped in and someone else was there, you went to say hi. When I was leaving that night, I found the main door wide open and ripped off the magnets that held it shut unless someone fobbed in. Called one of the captains and waited in my car for him to show up. He said those magnets aren't the easiest things to rip a door open with, and with me being alone there, I was probably lucky I didn't go to investigate. Story 57. When I was in grad school, I would work weekends at a care center for mentally ill and significantly developmentally disabled people. The care center was an extremely old building. It used to be a hotel and had been a creamery in the late 1800s. It's still listed as a local haunted hotspot. Supposedly, a young girl passed there in an accident when it was a creamery. On weekends, one of my jobs was to inventory the belongings of residents in the storage area, which happened to be deep in the basement of the building. To crank up the creepy factor further, the storage room required a key to get out, meaning you could be locked in what was essentially a dungeon with no cell reception. I found the only way to deal with this was to listen to CCAR at all times while I was down there. The downside was I couldn't hear if any ghosts were sneaking up behind me, but the pros outweighed the cons. Story 58. I sail a lot on lakes, not the sea. I have a little bit thalassophobia, but that's another story. But one time it got dark a bit and I was sailing and tired after a day of doing so, until I got hauled by another boat with 2 guys on it. In first instance, nothing wrong. Could be something trivial. But they told me they lost their dog on a small island nearby. If I were familiar with HTE area, if I knew people living there, and if I could help with searching. Now, I'm not the worst one, but something felt off, especially all the attention of if I were on vacation, alone, or had friends living in the neighborhood. Plus, who takes a dog on a sailboat where there is barely any room? It was a really small boat. Every time I think back of that moment, I really don't want to think about getting hitting on a small island, but somehow it feels exactly like how 2 guys would lure a victim to its pass. Thing is, afterwards I notified the harbor master, but since tourists do weird stuff all the time, he didn't get bothered by it. But you tell me, how does one lose a large dog on an island that's not even 1.5 square kilometers? Who even takes a large dog on a small sailing ship where barely 2 persons can sit normally without having to hang beside the boat? It all just felt off, somehow. I don't know. I don't scare easily, but I'm not sure. Now, story 59. This didn't happen to me, but to my mom. Before I was born, she used to play the pipe organ for our church. She would sometimes be at the church in the evenings when nobody else was there so she could practice. She had her own key so she could let herself in, lock the door behind her, again she was by herself, and lock up when she left. This is a huge building, about 200 years old, and just as beautiful and creepy as you're probably imagining. The organ is at the front of the church, and the pipes are way in the back near the ceiling. As my mom played the organ, her back was to the rest of the church, with the pews lined up directly behind her. Since the building is so old, the floors and pews are very creaky. She would often hear footsteps walking up the creaky aisle, and then the sound of someone sitting down in the creaky front pew. They would sit there for a few minutes and listen to her practice, and then she'd hear them creakily get up and leave. She would always look back over her shoulder when she heard this, and of course, there was nobody there. But she never let it bother her. She just kept playing. She figured they came to listen to organ music, so she was going to give them organ music. Story 60. Many years ago, I worked 3 shifts from 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. doing systems testing in the aerospace industry. The testing area was in a different building than my office. I would work a few hours, then come back to my office and have lunch, and then go back and work the remaining 4 hours until shift change. One night around 3 a.m., I went back to my office to have my lunch. While I was happily eating lunch, I suddenly heard the printer down the hall go off. I found that curious, as I was the only one on the floor, or so I thought. About 15 minutes later, the printer was still going and I decided to investigate. Someone was printing the New Testament of the Bible. I left it alone and went back to my office to eat. About 45 minutes later, I had to go back to the test floor for the rest of my shift. I walked by the printer room and I kid you not, the printout was gone. Now the thing is, I worked on a secure floor where some classified documents are kept. In order to get in at night, so you had to face the camera outside the door, show your badge, in order to get in. The door is loud when it is opened and closed, yet I heard nothing. To this day, I have never figured out who was printing the Bible and how they got in. Story 61. A coworker and I were doing some routine maintenance and inspections at an electrical substation. This facility is in the middle of the desert, about 30 miles out of town and 10 miles from the nearest main road. We were the only ones there, no other vehicles parked outside. We go through 2 locked gates and 2 locked doors to get to the breakers we need to test. When we enter the room we will be working in, we hear frantic whispering above the hum of the equipment. Not a conversation, but a single intelligible voice. The whispers go silent as I step into the room. My coworker and I glance at each other without a word and quietly and cautiously sweep the room. This is an area that gets frequent illegal immigrant traffic, but I had no idea how or why they gained access to this building. We searched every inch of that room, but didn't find a trace of human activity aside from our own. We performed our tasks and left, sharing very few words. Once we were finished and back in the truck, my buddy confirmed that I had heard the voice as well. We haven't spoken about it since. Story 62. I worked alone at a small power plant in the middle of nowhere. It's just me, no one else, for dozens of miles. The nearest town is over an hour drive. Anyways, late at night, like 11 p.m. or so, I need to relieve myself, so I go into the attached bathroom. I hear a noise, but at night you always hear things and just assume it's an auditory hallucination. Anyways, I leave the restroom and no crap, there's a man just staring at me on the other side of the control room. He's between me and the exit door. He's very disheveled looking and just standing there, not saying a word. Now, I was in the military and spent some time as a security contractor in Iraq. I know how to throw down in an excessively violent manner if need be. That said, I know how guns work and how I'm at a disadvantage. Basically, this guy was a homeless man that had walked out to my plant and wanted some food or a job for money. I gave him my sandwich and told him he had to go, though. I let him stay in the heated shack outside the fence and called the sheriff. They showed up after about an hour and a half and picked him up. Story 63. This isn't particularly extreme, but my office is in a basement, far away from everyone else's offices, and I can go most of the day without seeing anyone else unless I leave to get some food. It used to be a photography lab, so despite being in a basement, the ventilation is intentionally very good. So good, in fact, that on many days, the office is filled with the loud, overlapping low-frequency drones of the fans in the air conditioning system all day. I've never seen anything particularly creepy, other than bugs, but I've heard plenty of sounds that are exactly what you'd expect to hear from a video game trying to scare you. Exact replicas of Minecraft darkness noises. Skitterings and distant rumblings that are artifacts of things happening in the pipes and other people moving in floors above. Nothing extreme, but it can lend itself to a sense of paranoia after a few hours. Story 64. I was in Ray in college. My senior year, I was student teaching, so I stayed on campus during the college spring break, since the high school was still in. We had some international students who stayed on campus during the break in my area, so I volunteered to sit office hours and do rounds each night. There were 4 dorms in my area, and the one building only had 1 student on the first floor. I did my first rounds at 8 and went to do my second rounds at 10 p.m. On the 3rd floor of the building, on my second rounds, someone had gone to every door and colored in the white boards posted on every door. Black marker, solid, parallel lines, each board methodically filled in. It would have taken hours, and I know that they weren't colored in when I did rounds at 8. I had heard stories about that building, light switches randomly flicking off, people seeing faces reflected on windows, that sort of stuff. I decided to skip doing rounds on that floor the rest of the week. Story 65. My first job was as a closer at Taco Bell. The only people in the store after about 10 or 11 p.m. were myself and whoever was closing for the night. I was always told stupid stories about the ghost of Taco Bell and just thought, yeah, whatever. On multiple occasions during the end of the night, after we had closed, strange things would happen. I remember one day we had a really slow night, like 3 cars from 10, 12. I was taking care of the cleaning equipment and took the mop bucket back to its station next to the back door. The door had a small window pane on it so you could see if anything was in front of it before you opened it. I glanced over at the door and noticed a foggy handprint on the outside of the door. None if the other windows or doors had prints on them and no fog or mist was anywhere else. That was the creepiest thing I had seen since working there. You'd have other minor things like product falling on the ground in the walk and cooler or a random bang in the dining room. Sometimes you'd get stupid people that would get mad because we were already closed. So they would throw a fit, which could explain some of the sounds. but the handprint was the least explainable thing I can remember. Story 66. I inspected an old abandoned hospital several times and would talk to my security guard escort about his experiences. This place could be the set of The Walking Dead. It's extremely creepy. There is stuff scattered all over the floors, missing ceiling tiles, and only every fourth light or so is on in the hallways. As we walked the building, we could hear doors slam and other loud noises coming from the other floors. He said he caught addict in there all the time. He told me his creepiest experience was seeing a child running on the fourth floor from the lobby area. He searched the entire building but couldn't find anyone inside, even though there is only one unsealed entrance. This apparently has occurred several times, but he told me he still doesn't believe in ghosts. The guards have to walk this hospital every night armed only with mace. I, gladly, have never gone back, although I drive my son by it sometimes to freak him out. Story 67. I used to work as an overnight duty engineer monitoring corporate buildings across the world. Completely lone working, not even any security on site. They got around the bit by having the security firm phone once an hour to confirm I was okay and a once-a-night visit from a mobile security guard. One night, early on in the job, the building had a power cut. This might not sound too bad, but it is spooky as all the ambient noise from computers, aircon, and servers just go silent. Noises you wouldn't normally hear come into sharp focus. Buildings creak and make lots of noises you wouldn't expect. At that time I smoked, so I went outside for a cigarette. It wasn't until I came back in the building that I realized that the main door, and all the other doors, maglocks had disengaged due to the power cut. So I was sitting alone in a creepy building and all the security doors protecting me from the outside world were unlocked, and I had zero backup. Thankfully, nothing bad happened, but that was a very long 5 hours of my life. Before anybody says it, I didn't think about deadlocking the doors until the morning after, and I felt like a right for overlooking the obvious solution to the security problem. Story 68. I used to work in a care home for the elderly, so have quite a few creepy stories, but the one that stuck with me was this one night. I was working the night shift. At the time, we had 12 residents, all relatively well behaved. Most would sleep through the night without too much drama, so it was just me and another nurse idling in the kitchen watching the monitor board for alarms. About 3 a.m., we noticed the figure of an old lady shuffling up and down the corridor. I decided to go check it out and help her get back into bed if she needed. I get there and see it's our newest resident, Renee, and she looked really annoyed. "Renee, it's 3 a.m. What are you doing up at this time?" "It's that damn Dolly," she said. "She keeps trying to get into my bed and I'm sick of it." I calmed her down, took her back to her room, and helped her into bed. She asked me to stay for a bit in case Dolly came back, and I did until she fell asleep. We didn't have a resident called Dolly. We had a resident called Polly. Polly passed a month before Renee arrived. Story 69. I went at work with one other person. We work in what's basically a building in the middle of the woods. This one particular part of the building has a TV and a lot of glass windows to set the picture for you. My partner and I were watching the TV, and I simply said, "I feel like I'm being watched." He creepily said, "Dude, I never had that feeling, but right now I feel it too." We both pressed our faces against the glass to get a clear look outside, and he confirmed also. Seen a man behind us in the same room off the glass reflection. We both freaked out and started looking down the corridors. Nothing. No one was there. Then all of a sudden, the two crosses hanging on the wall on each side of the TV both fell off at the same time. I was scared, but the guy I was with legibly started freaking out. He was trying to leave, but he would lost his job if he left without a replacement. Sorry if the story's not written the best. My grammar is terrible. Story 70. I am the one who caused the creepy experience. I once was at my college after hours, and no one ever stays after hours. I was studying in one of the classrooms when I heard doors opening and closing. I went out of the classroom to find a security guard playing with his phone while walking and making sure classroom lights were closed. He was just 2 classrooms away. I waited outside the class ready to beg him to allow me to finish studying. My only concern was him throwing me out, as I had a lot to cover. As he passed, I said hi and got ready to beg. The guy raised his eyes off his phone, turned blue as if he had seen a ghost, and chose to believe that I was not real. He then started praying, got his arm into the room. As I stepped aside, closed the lights. Then he immediately freaks out and runs away. I returned to the classroom and continued studying while being uneasy, but continued to my usual schedule. Story 71. I used to be a CNA, and at this one dementia home, part of my shift was doing laundry in the basement for a couple hours. Basement setup, elevator, long hallway with laundry room, janitor closet, fire escape, and a room that was always locked. I'm guessing boiler room, elevator machinery room. The elevator would always open and close without anyone ever being there. I'd hear footsteps and people talking in the basement hallway sometimes too. Sometimes if it happened, I'd look out of the laundry room and see staff, but most of the time no one would be there. I would always feel watched. I also wasn't the only CNA that had that happen down there. My cousin also worked at the same facility and would sometimes do the overnight. She said how the activity rooms would feel like they were full of people, but all the residents would be fast asleep in their rooms. I personally only felt stuff in the basement and nowhere else, but I would definitely be on edge if I was alone anywhere in the building. I'm not surprised the place is haunted. Residents have died there. It happens at every senior home. It's just such a feeling to actually witness paranormal moment. Story 72. Worked in wildland firefighting for a bit, and we camped out when we were out working on anything. Most of what we did wasn't actually on active fires, but more just mitigation and stuff. Anyway, we slept in tents every night as some pretty isolated areas. One morning, we all woke up and pretty much everyone said it sounded like some animal was walking near our tents and brushing against them. One guy went to take a poop and came back and told us there was a very fresh deer carcass right near our camp. We all took a look, and it looked like it had been hitting last night by a mountain lion. Suffice to say, we all brought knives or whatever we had with us if we had to pee at night. Not that it would help much against a kitty. Story 73. I worked in fast food when I was in school. Every employee had a story about the ghost. Here's mine. We were closing up, and the only people left in the restaurant was my boss and I. We were heading out the back door when I realized I forgot to clock out. She waited by the back door while I walked up front to the register. While I was up there, I started joking about the ghost because I knew she was easily spooked by paranormal stuff. I was just saying dumb crap like, "If you're here, show yourself," or "Please speak so we know you exist," or something along those lines. Anyway, the second I say that, I hear this rustling noise coming from the dining room and getting louder and closer. It sounded like someone running full speed in baggy clothing. I didn't wait around. I booked it out of there as fast as I could. Even having seen what I believe is a paranormal entity on a different occasion, this is the encounter that spooks me the most. Story 74. Worked third shift at a resort in Georgia. It was on an island with 2 hotels, one which had 300 rooms and a Hilton. In the winter, there would be times where the only people on the whole island were me, front desk, and a night auditor. My shift was from 11 to 7, so I would do all my work, which took an hour, then go park at one of the summer lots on a hill. I drove up a walk path to get there because the gate to the parking lot was closed. I would sleep for about 4 hours. One night, I'm laying there in the work vehicle, and I see what looks like lights from a car pass over the windows. My first thought was crap. I'm in trouble, but when I set up, there was nothing there. At the bottom of the parking lot, maybe 30 yards away, I swear I saw a little all-white, gray, human-looking thing run in the bushes. It was maybe 4 feet tall. I went back up front and never went in that parking lot again. Story 75. I bartended at a bar in a tiny rural town on weeknights. Needless to say, there were rarely any customers. I worked there for about 7 or 8 months before anything happened. One night I was washing dishes, and I heard someone whistling a tune by the men's bathroom. I turned around because I thought a customer came in. No one was there. For the rest of the night, I heard footsteps and whistling. After that night, this happened weekly. I told another bartender who said she heard a man's voice say hello from across the bar when she was the only one there too. I ended up quitting a few months later because I was so freaked out. Story 76. Being in isolation, however brief, changes your mind in ways most people who have experienced it know well. I work nighttime as a security officer in a luxury apartment complex near the city. I've dealt with junkies on a substances induces rage and men pulling guns on me, but none of it scared me like my own mind could. One night, I was walking building by building, step by step, when this feeling came over me. It wasn't a conscious thought, but more of this primitive motive to protect myself. My eyes darted left and right looking for the danger my brain was convinced was near. My heart was pounding in my ears, and paranoia took over my minds alongside the adrenaline that took over my body. I had 1,000 thoughts cross my mind, and also none. And then it was over. The whole experience didn't last more than 2 seconds, but it did make me realize the affects isolation has on you, even in 8 short hours. Truly on of the creepiest experience I've had in this line of work. Story 77. I had a part-time night job doing medical transcription in a small office in a very large building in an iffy part of town. There was a group of women in an office across the hall. I kept my office door shut to avoid them popping in and startling me while I had my headphones on and was engrossed in my work. Well, if I happened to work a little later than usual and they were leaving, they would turn off all the lights, not realizing I was still there until they would see my car in the lot. Super creepy having to walk a good length to get out of the building with only a couple of small red emergency lights to guide the way. BTW. I always wondered why one of them couldn't walk back in and turn on the lights once they saw that I was still there. Story 78. A few years ago, my mom told me a pretty creepy morgue story. It was from one of the workers there. Apparently, she was going around prepping the bodies to incinerate them. And as she was prepping one of the bodies, she heard a voice. She went to go check out where it came from, and the person was alive. The worker said it was one of the scariest moments of her life. Story 79. I worked at a non-profit and was often the only one in the building. We were a standalone building, not strip mall style. One time a random guy walked towards me with his hands outstretched towards my face. and was going to hold my face by my cheeks until I said firmly and in a panic, "Don't touch me." Then he looked up to the ceiling and said, "Well, now what? He doesn't want me to touch him?" I said, "Who are you?" and don't remember what he said. But basically, he was just some crazy middle-aged dude, likely homeless and in need of medical attention. He said something about angels talking to him or something, and I said, "Let me walk you out." When we got outside, he said something about them moving the clouds around again. They're up to something. After that, I locked the door that was supposed to remain open to the public. I saw him once again later, but he was talking to someone else. Story 80. I don't work in isolation, however, have experienced some creepy things in my last job. I'm from the United Kingdom, and for 5 years worked in one of the country's largest cinema chains. The site I worked at was very old and run down. Last year, we played the film Darkest Hour about Winston Churchill. Now, me and my work colleague on the shift one time had to clean the screen for the next showing. There was a few customers in watching it, and as we have the doors open, people begin to walk out during the credits. However, there's a loud, distinctive laugh of a woman the whole time. Because of the laughing, me and my colleague never walked in to begin cleaning it. It wasn't until the credits ended and the lights went up that we entered the screen to realize there was no woman. There were no customers left in the screen the whole time. We both asked each other if we heard the laughing and did. Needless to say, we were creeped out and got out of there fast. Story 81. A nowhere near as isolated of an employment opportunity, but it happened when the store was closed for the evening. Worked at a Goodwill in Arizona when I was 17 years old. Came in at 7 to start my shift, only to be greeted by a bunch of police cars. Asked what was going on to one of the assistant managers. Dude was cool, always helped us young employees get booze or smokes. He showed me the security footage of a baby grand piano that was donated a few days earlier, straight up, sliding 6 feet out of nowhere, setting off all the motion sensors. It was pretty nuts. Story 82. I work at a Tudor Hall that's a museum in Stockport. It's set in the middle of a large park. One night, I was closing up the upstairs rooms, and the only other person in the hall was on the ground floor. I'd gotten as far as the plaster room, which has a reputation as the most haunted room in the building. I was trying to close the door to the Paradise bedroom, a small room just off the plaster room, but the latch is old, so I was struggling with it. I had my back to the room. There was a huge crashing noise right behind me, which made the entire room shake. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The only thing that could have made that noise was if the Cromwellian suit of armor had fallen over, but it was perfectly still in the corner. I scarpered. Creepiest thing that has ever happened to me there. Story 83. Warehouse worker here. We store medical records dating from at least prior to 1980s to 2018 for many facilities. Isolation-wise, we only have a few workers. Generally, I could spend upwards of 4 hours without seeing another worker daily. Aisles, for the most part, are dark, and you have to use a headlamp flashlight to find records. I would say the creepiest thing for me is shutting the lights off for the night. Walking through the place when there is no one there with no light feels like a haunted house. The catwalks and shelves literally pop and creak all day. But when it's dark and you're tired, you really start thinking of and seeing bad stuff. Haha. Story 84. Work on third shift in my local hospital. Had to cover for a housekeeper. That is not my job. I clean her rooms. After a grueling shift of clearing rooms, wiping red liquid off stuff, I go to hide out in the locker room. There's a couch there. I plop down and blink and look across from me. There's a woman sitting on the opposite side of the room from me. She was covered in matted red liquid in her blonde hair, not moving. I wanted to scream, but I was so tired from climbing so many flights of stairs from earlier. I tried talking to her. I said, "If you're going to hit me, just do it. I'm too weak to care right now." I close my eyes waiting for that sweet release, and a minute goes by and she is gone when I open my eyes. Story 85. I work at an auditorium, and during shows, presentations, it's busy, but before and after I'm only there with one other person. One morning around 7 o'clock or so, I left to go use the restroom in one of the dressing rooms backstage. I just finished washing my hands and I'm about to dry them when I hear a toilet flush from the stall next to the one I had just been in. At first, I thought that I must have accidentally set off the sensors on it, and it automatically flushed. But then I remembered the dressing room toilets are all manual. The next thing I tell myself is that I must have imagined the sound, but I pressed gently on the stall door and it opened with the water still rippling from the flush, and that's when I skedaddled out of there. Story 86. I live in a very quiet dorm room with 3 floors, very small place. I decided one night to use the bathroom at 3 a.m. The bathrooms in this dorm are public washrooms with shower stalls, and the lights are movement activated. I use the bathroom with the main lights turning on, but the shower ones stay off. The room is silent the entire time, save for me. But when I exit the stall, which is directly across from the shower stalls, the other light comes on because I moved. Under the stall, I see a pair of pale feet not moving. This means that someone has been standing there completely silent for at least 15 minutes, as that's the time it takes for the lights to go off. Story 87. I work in my local hospital. And when we deep clean rooms after people go home, we can be alone up to 40 minutes in the room. One time, I went into a room where a man had passed away. I start cleaning and clear as day. In the far corner of the room, I hear, "Can I help you with something?" I freeze and think, crap, family must have been in the bathroom and I didn't notice. But as I looked around the room and bathroom, I saw no one. The hair on my neck stood up as I realized it could have been the patient's lingering spirit reaching from the other world. He must have been pretty confused that I was cleaning his room and not acknowledging him. Story 88. I work alone every week in isolation for 2 days. The worst ones are when the central heating goes on and the building creaks due to thermal expansion. I did work in an office once where they had a shrine to a fallen colleague. Every time I passed it, the radio would turn on or off. I did not like that part of the building very much when I was a fisherman. We were out in the North Sea about 100 miles off Lossiemouth, and there was a thunderstorm. The lighting would hit the water, and there would be buzzes, squeals, and groans coming from around the boat, as well as there being glowing patches in the water. That was very creepy.